Hello, FJL World. A very interesting case of Steve, who was driving his car, wintertime, slippery roads, and the car in front of him swerved off the road, crashed into the barrier, and the car started emitting smoke. Steve got very nervous, pulled over his car, called an ambulance right away, and ran over the driver to see if everything was okay. Inside was a lady named Esther, and turned out that Esther was conscious. She was doing okay. She was a little bit bruised up and a little bit maybe confused, but she was speaking, she was communicating, and there was no problem. Within 2 minutes, the ambulance showed up, and after doing a full check, Esther was given the bill of clean health that she could carry on with her day. The ambulance turned to Steve and said, "Here's a bill to pay for the ambulance service. Who has to pay for this bill?" Can Steve turn to Esther and say, "I called this ambulance for you thinking that things were not going to be great and it was an emergency situation"? Would Esther be required to pay for that bill when in the end it wasn't really something that she needed? So there is a law, there is a basic concept that if a person incurs expenses on their own initiative to save somebody else's life, that person whose life they thought they were saving or they attempted to save would actually be required to compensate the person who was helping them. So indeed, there's a case mentioned by the Ramah, whose Ashkenazi commentary on the Code of Jewish Law. He writes that if two people were imprisoned and one person incurs expenses to get the other person out of jail, the other person is actually liable to compensate him, even if that person claims that he would have got out regardless. So we see, unless you could say that it was very clear that he would have, he didn't need the person, he didn't need that person's effort at all, then he would have to prove that, then he wouldn't have to compensate him. Similarly, a person who is seriously ill and someone calls a special doctor and flies them in, and in the meantime, while that doctor's coming in, that individual heals and gets better, one could argue that that individual maybe doesn't have to pay, but this law is saying that that person would have to pay because the courts, the Jewish court system really is encouraging anyone who can to act on behalf of someone who needs the help, especially if it's a life-threatening situation. We don't waste seconds and minutes, do something right away. So in this case, we could say to Esther, there is a little bit of a debate in the end of the story. At the very least, to have a compromise to pay in a certain amount, if not all of it, Esther should contribute. The fact that Steve was doing something really on her benefit, on her behalf, and he was doing it to help her, in the end it wasn't a necessary act, but Jewish law recognizes the importance and wants to encourage people to do what they can to rescue the lives of others, even if in the end it's not needed. That's something that we would put on Esther and say, you'd have to contribute to that.